Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 18th of January of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And today we will continue our discussion of the situation in Solidar direction. This morning we have already started this discussion, and today during the day we got a lot of very interesting details and updates, and according to information we have, as a result of fierce clashes on Solidar direction, the Russians managed to establish control over the village by the name of Vesele. This one. We have already discussed in the morning update that the Russians launched their offensive operation and that the clashes were taking place along the southern border of the village, and that the Russians were trying to force the Ukrainians to step back. And as I understand, as a result of those clashes, the Russians did manage to force the Ukrainians to step back further to the north in direction of the fields, and currently the Ukrainians are trying to prepare or to let's say to create the next defense belt a few kilometers further to the north. So let's start from the beginning, and once again let's discuss the situation. First we got update about some Russian progress on the flanks of Vesele. Rybar during the day reported about the Russian clashes on the outskirts of the village, and the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation at their more daily updates reported that as a result of very fierce clashes the village was taken under control. So now we have of course this is not geolocated confirmation, and but Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, when talking about some, let's say, some territory gains, are more or less reliable resource, so we have possibility to update the map. Obviously, the Ukrainians, obviously Vesele was taken not today, obviously Vesele was taken probably yesterday or the day before yesterday, and during the previous 2 or 3 days the Russians were repelling the Ukrainian counterattacks that obviously were taking place those days. And after the Russians realized that they managed to repel every single Ukrainian attack, the Ministry of Defense reported this piece of news. Now the situation is getting very difficult for the Ukrainians, because the most important thing that the Russians managed to achieve as a result of taking Vesele is that they managed to get the operational space. From now on the Russians have possibilities to attack in many directions, of course, and the closest city, the next Russian goal is to establish control over Razdolovka. And now using moving along the fields, the Russians can bypass the minefields, the Ukrainian defense belt, and to attack Razdolovka from behind, which will obviously force the Ukrainians to step back from the village further to the north in direction of Perezne and even to Kuzminivka. Furthermore, the Russians can continue advancing further to the north in direction of the next defense belt of Ukrainian forces, and we are talking about these tree lines and the forest belts to the north of Vesele. So now the next defense belt, it's not a very big stronghold or very powerful fortification, it's just a, let's say, natural barrier that the Ukrainians are trying to use as some kind of, let's say, defense belt, but this is the next target of the Russians when talking about movements to the north. And of course the Russians now have possibilities to continue their advancing further along the railways from Bilogorovka in direction of Vyimka. And the Russians obviously are going to do this. This attack will allow the Russians to collapse to collapse the Ukrainian defense belt around Sporne, and obviously this is also another way of attack the Russians can do. So this is the main things that operational space gives to this or that army. If you get the operational space, then you can move in many directions, and the Ukrainians are forced currently to increase their defense on every single direction. Meanwhile, the Russians can choose let's say they can attack Razdolovka, they can move further to the north, or they can move along the railways trying to collapse and bypass and to attack Sporne from behind. But anyway, regarding the progress, regarding the situation in this area, we remember that these cities, like villages like Razdolovka, Fedorovka, Vesele, Sporne, Vyimka, Ivanodarivka, is something like the first defense belt in direction of Siversk. The most important and the most powerful defense belt starts on the top to the north of Vyimka, Ivanodarivka. There are 4 strongholds that are under Ukrainian control. The first one between Vyimka and Ivanodarivka, we can see the signs of the trenches from the satellite. As you can see, it's a very big company stronghold. Obviously the Russians will be forced to spend time to bypass this territory. Furthermore, the second one, located a little bit to the northwest of the first one, also significant number of trenches. there are a lot of Ukrainian soldiers that these trenches can, let's say, hold, and then the next stronghold located further and starts at the beginning of Siversk. This is another fortification area with significant number of trenches. So what does it mean? That means that currently the Russians bypassed probably the easiest defense belt of Ukrainian forces, and the most important part will start as soon as the Russians are able to get this probably red line. After this red line, the most important part and most interesting part of battle for Siversk is going to start. And there is the first defense belt that located to the east of Verkhnyakamyanska, Verkhnyakamyanska, this one which also the Russians tried to storm during the previous phase of the special military operation, but for now they haven't managed to establish control over this territory. Another important thing that we need to discuss, and I just want to remind you that during the December the Russians also managed to cross Vasikovka River and to establish a small foothold to the north of Saka and Vanseti, to the south of Fyodorovka. So this area is under Russian control. Very likely the Russians during the previous months managed to improve their positions, and currently the Russians do have like a certain 100% plan to attack and to encircle Razdolovka, at least from two directions. First direction Saka, Vanseti, Fyodorovka, the second one Vesele to the north behind Razdolovka. So obviously Razdolovka is going to be the first target of the Russian army during the next few weeks, maybe months or something like this. Obviously after the fall of Vesele, the Russians released their infantry, their forces, and now they can increase the pressure along the railway in direction of Vyimka, which will lead to collapse of Ukraine defense belt in the vicinity of Sporne. Obviously within the next days or weeks we're gonna see another wave of attack of the Russian forces in this direction, and obviously the Ukrainians, if they want to save their lives and not to lose infantry, will be forced to retreat towards Ivano-Darivka. Another thing that I would like to discuss with you, the activization of clashes from the Russian side on Bilogorovka direction. This area is under protection responsibilities of 81st Air Mobile Brigade, and the thing is that during the previous 24 hours we got update that as a result of clashes the Russians managed to establish control over additional 3 lines and the territory right in front of the village. Of course it's not it's a very huge and big progress of the Russian forces. Furthermore, during the previous week we got update that the Russians established control over this industrial area, so the Russians are very close to Bilogorovka itself, and they're about to start the, let's say, the ground operation to start storming the village. But the thing is that many Ukrainian forces are located on the hill, and to tell the truth, if the Russians are going to attack Bilogorovka this way, this is going to be just a suicide operation. Obviously they need to wait a little bit, they need to wait at least until Sporne fell. After the fall of Sporne, maybe they can start movements or something like this, but before, highly unlikely the Russians are able to get something. Anyway, we see that when talking about the southern and the eastern flank of Siversk, the Russians are moving along 4 roads. First one, Saka Vanseti, let's say to Fyodorovka, Kuzminovka. The second one is Bilogorovka, Razdolovka, Vyimka. Third one is Sporne, and fourth one is Bilogorovka. But don't forget that the Russians during the previous weeks managed to establish and to achieve significant results in the Kremenная forest, in Serebryanka forest, and according to some sources, currently the Russians control this territory and they're getting closer and closer to the Ukrainian positions along the Seversky Donetsk river, and we have already calculated the distance from the edge Russian positions to, let's say, Grigorovka. The distance is around 300.5 kilometers, so it's nothing. Of course there are a lot of work to do to bypass this territory, and obviously the Russians will do this, because if they want to establish control over Bilogorovka, first of all the Russians need to bypass the rest of Serebryanka forest and the area around Seversky Donetsk river and try to cross Seversky Donetsk somewhere here. This will allow the Russians to encircle the Ukrainian forces of 81st Brigade on the hill and to collapse this territory. But there are still a lot of job to do until the Russians are able to get Seversky Donetsk. Anyway, we see that Seversk Ukrainian group, Ukrainian forces in Seversk direction, are in a very big trouble because the Ukrainians currently don't have reserves. Recently the Ukrainians were completely defeated in Krynki. More and more sources confirms that Ukrainians lost that foothold, that currently they're trying to retreat and withdraw their troopers from there. We will move to Krynki very soon, but from the Russian side we see that everything is okay. They continue their mobilization process, they continue signing the contracts, they continue improving their production of weapons. They have signed contracts with different countries around the world, with Iran, with the Korean country, and so that's why they have significant number of anything they need: drones, tanks, artillery systems, missiles, everything they need. And from the Ukrainian side, we see that support of Ukraine is getting lower and lower. Just the fresh example, according to information we have, France just today have reported and announced that they're going to start supporting Kiev, Ukraine, with different types of weapons, including the guided bombs AASM, and the France is going to send around 50 bombs of this type each month. For statistics and for the understanding of the numbers, according to information we have, the Russians are using around 135 bombs per day. So France is going to send 50 of this type per month, and the Russians are using 135 per day. So you need to understand that very likely these 50 bombs are not even going to get the combat line. Maybe they will be destroyed as a result of another Gerain strike or Kinzhal strike or something like this. So it's nothing. It's just like as a voice, a sound somewhere in the deep space. And now we are moving to Terny, to Liman direction, where we also see some Russian progress in advance towards Zherebets River. Today we got some geolocations from the Ukrainian side, and which confirms the Russian progress. And it's very difficult to say, but it's easier to say that we got geolocations from the Ukrainian side that says that as a result of Russian offensive operation, they at least managed to get this area, and probably they have some certain control. Because we have one video where the Russian forces were attacking the Ukrainian defense belt. Maybe the video is old, very difficult to understand. The Russian personal carrier BMP-3 was attacking the 3 lines of Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians attacked this armored vehicle from behind with FPV drone, and as a result of strike, the Russian armored vehicle was completely destroyed, like annihilated, as you can see according to the video. A little bit to the south we see another video how another Russian tank was destroyed with FPV drone. So all these videos show us that there are very heavy clashes either from the Russian and Ukrainian side, that both either the Russians and the Ukrainians have losses and had losses, but the Russians are not providing us any geolocated confirmations of the progress, and very likely that the Russians managed to move further, much closer to Zherebets River, but without any geolocations. When talking about Kupiansk, we have nothing to talk about, just regular activity. The only thing we got during the previous 24 hours is the Russian flamethrower strikes against the Ukrainian positions on the northern edge position of the village, which probably means that the Russians managed, let's say, they created or they changed their original plan, and now they started everything from the beginning. And the first phase is to destroy the strongholds with flamethrowers, with FPV drones, but obviously very soon the Russians will renew their offensive operation, because the Ukrainians are afraid of Kupiansk most of all. And obviously, if the situation is going to develop the same way like the situation in the vicinity of Solidar or Bakhmut, Artyomovsk, or in Krynki, of course, sooner or later the Russians will attack Kupiansk very heavy, and this will lead to the same story. Now we are moving to Bakhmut Artyomovsk direction, where we also got a lot of very interesting updates. First, let's talk a little bit about this video. On this clip, we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions along the main stronghold in front of Chasov Yar. On this video, we can see the signs of the stronghold. On the left top corner, we're going to see the first corner of the stronghold. This is it. This is the stronghold that we can see on the video. And if we take a look to the top right corner, we're gonna see the, let's say, the signs of the next stronghold on the northern part. So as you can see, this is a very powerful fortification that the Russians haven't managed to bypass yet, and that's why they're focusing and concentrating their fire heavily with the purpose to destroy the Ukrainian defense belt and to capture this territory and to move further in the direction of Chasov Yar. But as you can see, everything is not so fast. We got a very interesting video from Bohdanivka itself, and let's take a look at this video. video. This video was published by the Ukrainian sources by the 24th Mechanized Brigade. On this video we can see the Russian flag on the northeastern part of Bohdanivka, which means that there is a Russian foothold, that this territory is under Russian control, not the entire Bohdanivka, but at least some part of the village. Of course, we will in a second move to the let's say these polygons. We will talk about the colors and so on. What can we see on this video is how the Ukrainians were bombing and attacking the Russian positions inside of the village, which is 100% confirmation of Russian control. So now let's talk about these territories. So based on that video, as a result of Russian offensive operation, very likely they managed to establish control over this territory. At least this region can be confirmed. This control can be confirmed by the previous video we just watched. But the most important thing that we still haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation whether the Russians managed to establish control over this stronghold, which is the most important and powerful on this direction. To tell the truth, I think that now let's say I have some doubts, of course, because I haven't seen this like geolocation, but now I think that this territory is under Russian control because there are like few options. If the Russians have their control in this area, which we just could see during the video, also we had geolocations that the Russians control these tree lines, so very likely this stronghold is also under Russian control, either under Russian control or maybe some Ukrainians are encircled there, but probably this territory is also under Russian control. So that's why before the next video we will adjust this territory and we will show everything that located to the top or to the right of this red line under either under Russian control and in the gray zone, and everything that is below this red line will be colored as a territory of Ukrainian control. I believe this is going to be fair because we have more or less reliable geolocations from the positions that allow us to think that the northern stronghold was captured by the Russians during the previous days. When talking about the southern direction, as we discussed, according to information we have, the Russians managed to establish control over this stronghold by the name of Topor. This is the Russian word, and so we will adjust the map also before the next video. But as I understand, if the Russians establish control over this stronghold by the name of Topor, that means that the tree lines in the forest belt to the west, this one is also under Russian control. So as I understand, this entire area I will mark on map either in the gray zone or under complete Russian control. We will adjust the map before the next video, and this is about the adjustments. And of course, now we see that the Russians managed to establish like a very powerful stronghold and, let's say, foothold in front of Ivanovska, and now they have no problems to continue advancing along the tree lines further to the north to Ivanovska and to attack this village, this central defense belt of Ukrainian forces from many directions. And obviously we're going to see this the next week. And I'll remind you that this territory is under responsibilities of ex-Wagner forces Concord and the Akhmat special unit. So probably the clashes are going to start very soon, exactly on this direction. We haven't received anything from Andreevka area, from these fields. Very likely the Ukrainians soon will start regrouping because they see the risks in Ivanovska and Bohdanivka, so that's why I understand they will redeploy some reinforcements and reserves from these strongholds to the north. Probably they will keep some rearguard forces in this area, but they will be collapsed and defeated by the Russians as soon as the Russians launch more or less a big offensive on this direction. Now we are moving to Avdiivka area. We have some updates from this territory as well. As we discussed, the Russians continue their improving positions on the northern flank. Avdiivka is under very heavy fire during the previous 24 hours. On this video we can see how the Russian stormtroopers, storm airplane Su-25 bombed this territory, and we have, as you can see, the explosions are very heavy. But no progress on the ground, at least around the eastern part and so on. Interesting details are coming from Nivolska, the village that located to the south of Pervomayska. Today we got another video how the Russian infantry stormtroopers were attacking the Ukrainian positions along this tree line, how they were storming this territory, and as a result of that attack, they managed to clear these trenches and to establish complete control over this tree line. This is the Russian stormtroopers, on the bottom right corner Ukrainian stronghold, and the Russians were storming this area. This is a very important video because during the previous 3 days we got at least 2 geolocations from this area. Just 2 days ago we discussed this Russian attack with a personnel carrier or armored vehicle. This machine got the combat line, and after that the Russians start attacking the Ukrainian stronghold a little bit to the northwest. This is the Russian armored vehicle. Now this machine attacked the Ukrainian positions. There are a few questions I have. For example, on this video we can see snow on this video, and the first video we don't see any snow. So that's why maybe the first event took place earlier in comparison with this one when the Russian armored vehicle was attacking the Ukrainian positions. But anyway, both videos regarding the dates when those videos were published or events took place confirm and tell us that this territory is under complete Russian control, and we will adjust the map before the next video. So this territory is under the Russians, and as we can see, the Russians continue advancing further to Nivolska, which is the key region for in the battle for Pervomaisk, and of course in the battle for Krasnogorovka. When talking about Georgievka, we haven't received anything. Probably there is going to be operational pause for the next few days. The Russians managed to advance a lot during the previous period of time, and the same story about Novomikhailivka. Very likely the Russians managed to develop further their offensive operation and to capture these tree lines. Now they need to spend some time to dig in deeper, to refresh the forces, munition, and so on. Meanwhile, while all these processes, the Russians are bombing Novomikhailivka with different types of weapon. So for the next day, I don't think that operational pause is going to be too long. Probably a day or two the Russians will keep some silence, and after that they will renew their offensive operation. When talking about Vremivka tactical bridgehead, we haven't received almost anything. As few updates from Bradley Square, Zaporozhye area. The Russians continue advancing. We have some progress on the western part. Probably this is not the fresh video, but when talking about this video and this sector, we haven't received a lot of geolocations confirming Russian progress. There was just one video of Russian tank attack in this area, which confirms some progress, and now we see more details that how the Russians were capturing these tree lines and getting very close to the northern part of Rabotina. The Russians also launched a few waves, maybe some reconnaissance in force or reconnaissance in combat on the southern part of the village. We see destroyed armored vehicles of Ukrainian forces. So probably this is the first day when the Ukrainians start losing their armored vehicles on the outskirts of the village, which means the Russian progress and that the Russians were able to get very close to the Ukrainian positions. So the storm of Rabotina has started, the ground operation, not inside, not in the central part, currently just on the outskirts, but which also confirms the Russian plans, and maybe within the 2 weeks the Russians will return probably more than 50% of the village. Let's wait. Now we are moving to Krynki. We have some details, some updates from this territory, from this foothold, and the most important one is that the Ukrainians continue their retreating process, withdrawing positions. More and more resources confirm that, and today we got some more details about the reasons why the Ukrainians took a decision to leave this area, and this situation is coming from Kherson itself. According to information we have, around 150 Ukrainian soldiers refused to follow the orders, refused to cross the river, refused to go to Krynki. All of them were arrested and sent in a known direction. So that was the reason why the Ukrainians, let's say, lost the battle for the village, because they managed to collect, let's say, rotation group that should be sent to Krynki, but they refused to fight, and that was like the breaking moment. Also, you need to understand, you might say that if these forces, let's say, refuse to follow the order, the Ukrainians have possibility to collect more, but it doesn't work like this. It's like the situation, the soldiers on the ground have like tight connections between each other, and as I understand that if these 150 soldiers refuse to fight, refuse to go to Krynki, and if the Ukrainians even had possibilities to collect more, the new batch may ask themselves and Ukrainian commanders why these guys better than them. Why should we do the things that these guys refuse to do? So as I understand, all these things, all these small things force the Ukrainians to complete this story, to complete any attempts to fight for Krynki. Now they have just one pain, is how to withdraw their positions, to save as many as possible soldiers, and so on. Meanwhile, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions around Tyaginka, another day with significant number of Lancet that destroy significant number of artillery systems like M777 howitzers. The Russians destroyed lots of just tanks, just let's say supply cars, some positions. So a lot of things were destroyed another day, and according to information we have, the Russians also managed to destroy another Ukrainian air defense system, IRIS-T, a little bit to the north in the vicinity of the village by the name of Chaikina. On this, for example, according to the author of this video, he claims that on this video we can see how the Russians first discovered Ukraine IRIS-T, and then how they managed to destroy it. So the Ukrainians were completely defeated in Krynki, and obviously this situation will affect the global scope and global situation of Ukraine on this all over the combat line of contact. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.